to take you through a little bit is a bit of an understanding about modern slavery, and I appreciate there's probably a degree of understanding from a very high level to maybe others that haven't encountered it. So I'll take it right through the basics and try and put it into more layman's terms, stay away from like legal definitions and things like that. So I'll do that to start with, and then we've got a case study from a case that was across Plymouth and down in Truro of sexual exploitation, just to talk through the case. It's got some interesting points, how we investigated it and how we come across it. Although it's a case from a few years ago, we are seeing a lot of similar things happening. So I think it's as relevant today as it was when it was investigated probably about 5-6 years ago. And it does demonstrate, I think, the point of the presentation with modern slavery. Sometimes we're living in the Southwest. It's very nice. The statistics will tell you that it's one of the safest places in the country to live. And you might think, you know, modern slavery and human trafficking is something that doesn't happen down here in the Southwest. Unfortunately, it does. So I'll give you some of the statistics and I'll take you through this case study to show you that it is everywhere, unfortunately. So, firstly, what is modern slavery and human trafficking? So there's two elements, in layman's terms, two elements to modern slavery. That's the control and the exploitation of individuals. And you add those together and you get slavery, and that equals, my background is a financial investigator. People do this to make money. Interestingly, as part of the Modern Slavery Act, it isn't, you don't have to, you know, slavery or human trafficking, it doesn't have to make money. It's not part of the legislation, but it is a key aspect. Certainly when we're investigating it, one of the aspects we're looking at is who is making money out of this. Because if people are making money, people are probably losing money, and they're the people that are being exploited. But the two elements there, the control and the exploitation is fairly self-explanatory. How people are exploited, they're not paid properly, they're forced into work, but it's the control element which is slightly different, and something people sometimes can trip themselves up with a little bit. So I like to give an analogy of, you know, I work, I have a mortgage, I need to pay my mortgage in order to keep my house, but I'm not controlled. I have free will. If I want to work, I work. If I don't work. I understand what the consequences are, but just, you know, I couldn't say that I am controlled in any way just because I have to pay a mortgage in order to keep a house. So when it comes to elements and things like people not being paid minimum wage, or being people paid cash in hand rather than being paid properly and all the tax being paid, people will say, oh yeah, they're not being paid minimum wage, it's cash in hand, therefore they're being exploited. Okay, yeah, you might say, yeah, to a point they are being exploited, but are they being controlled? Have we got that element as well? So I would say something like that, paid cash in hand, you know, paid below minimum wage, is an indicator that there may be modern slavery, but it's not necessary that just that alone would make it modern slavery. There has to be an element of control. And there's lots of case law around what constitutes control of people. But yeah, it's worth bearing in mind when you're thinking about this, if the activity that you're seeing, does it stretch across into actually physically controlling somebody, or is it a step below that? Because we have offences like failure to pay minimum wage to deal with that sort of thing. So one of the things when I first started looking at modern slavery, I kind of questioned was, why is it called modern slavery? Why did it need this modern? What's so different about it? What's so new? And going back to, it's about almost 10 years exactly to when the Modern Slavery Act was first introduced, we used to see a lot of imagery like this around campaigns. So people, you know, chained up, people behind bars, people with their handcuffed, tied together. And actually, ironically, that's what I would say is traditional slavery. So going back centuries, that's what we would have seen, people chained up and physically restrained. I can tell you, in the years I've been doing this and all the cases that I've looked at, I can remember very, very few where actually anybody is physically restrained. The control is all emotional and psychological. It's horrendous, it's awful, and you've got people that are so broken and so controlled psychologically that they almost don't need to be told what to do. They will automatically do what they know their controller wants them to do. Now, the downside to using all this imagery, which is why we've stopped using it, and I would encourage, if you're using it in any campaigns yourself, to stop using it, is what this puts in the mind, particularly of professionals, is modern slavery equals handcuffs and ropes and tied up and physical restraint. So that when people go and encounter it and they see it, and they don't see handcuffs and rope and people chained to radiators and things like that, they assume there's no modern slavery. And actually, when you look at the modern aspect to it, it's the psychological, I believe it's the psychological control which has changed from traditional slavery. And that's why it's got this new term of modern slavery. So certainly from the policing side, and you'll start to see a lot of this imagery now has changed. So the, Closer Than You Think has people as a puppet, people being controlled. It's that control, rather psychological control rather than physical control, which forms the new bit. And that's actually the really difficult bit to kind of investigate and to see and to articulate when it comes to presenting cases at court to a jury. So we had there was a case where I spoke to the officers that ran the case. He said a really good example they had at court of how controlled a victim was. Normally in court, police want victims to have a really consistent story, so they come across well to the jury, and they don't change their story, and it's really consistent and great. And the SIO for a job told me we had a particular victim, and when they put him in the witness box, the prosecutor led them through their evidence, and that was fine. Then it came to the defense, and there were lots of defendants, so there were lots of barristers. So the first one started saying, well, couldn't you be wrong about this? Couldn't you be wrong? Couldn't this be happening? And they immediately just acquiesced to the barrister. Oh, yeah, I might be wrong. I might be wrong. Second barrister stood up and said, well, actually, couldn't it be this, this, and this? Yeah, you're right. It can be this. Yeah, whatever you say. The judge stopped him after the third barrister and said, it's quite clear this person will do whatever they are told. And at that, the prosecutor was very pleased and said that just showed how broken this individual was, that anybody with any authority, they would literally do whatever they were told. So when it came to actually presenting the case, the defense were all saying, this person was never chained up. They could have walked away. They were free. They made decisions. They made their own decisions. What that showed in the box, this person was not making their own decisions at all. Yet they weren't physically controlled. So yeah, that was I thought that was a really good example to show how it's that psychological control and that mental control. And that's what we see, and that's what we are looking for in cases now, is how that is being exercised. So within policing, we very much like to categorize crime. So our main 4 areas for modern slavery are labor exploitation, criminal exploitation. So sorry, our main 4 areas, with one which we are starting to see but is much less common, and that's organ harvesting. But yeah, our main 4 areas are labor exploitation, criminal exploitation, sexual exploitation, a little bit of domestic servitude, and we are starting to see in the UK the first few cases of organ harvesting as well. There can be a bit of crossover with some of these, so particularly sexual exploitation and labor exploitation. Sexual exploitation can involve predominantly females, but it can be men as well, who are forced into sex work. But it can also involve people who are willing sex workers, but their labor, they're still exploited for their labor. So there can be a crossover there. Again, another case that I spoke to the SIOs for, the senior investigating officers, sorry, I shouldn't use 3-letter abbreviations. that involved sexual exploitation, where some of the evidence they were looking at, a lot of the women were sex workers, but the SIO for that said, just because you're a sex worker doesn't mean that you want to do or that you are free to do sex work all of the time. And he said one of the most worrying bits of evidence they found was the amount of painkillers that were in some of these properties. He said, without a shadow of a doubt, while some of these women may have been willing sex workers, there was a lot of times when they were probably not willing and not wanting to be sex work, and they were being dosed up with painkillers and put out to work because they were being controlled and they had no choice. So even when you're encountering people, you know, with sexual exploitation that are willing sex workers, if they're controlled, then actually it's not just labor. It can be not just labor exploitation. You have to delve into how are they being controlled? Do they have that free will? Are they in control of, you know, what punters they see, what work they do when they do it, or are they being controlled by somebody else? And really, how free are they, and what are the risks to them? So, like I said, we do see a little bit of domestic servitude. It's quite a different sort of exploitation. It's very sort of hidden away compared to other types. So labor exploitation, to a certain extent, sexual exploitation, there'll be a lot of interaction with members of the public, whereas domestic servitude tends to be very hidden away behind closed doors. It tends to not be organised crime groups behind it. It tends to be more individuals, and you'll see reports in the news around, you know, doctors and things like that who turn out to have people working and being exploiting them as within their households. So yeah, that one, it's very difficult to detect, and gathering the evidence can be very difficult. It's not impossible though. And one of the, so in an example, one of the key bits from an SIO investigated one of these cases said they learned the hard way when they went in and they arrested individuals. They took somebody who they believed was a victim of domestic servitude. And when they were gathering the evidence, one of the things that were put forward by the suspects was that, oh no, this person, we look after them, they're part of the family, we care for them. Obviously, they looked at all the conditions in the house. But the SIO said, the one thing I regret not doing, which I later on, when it came to court and this defense came out, they're part of the family, she said, I know I looked through their photograph album. When we were searching their house, I looked through their photograph album, and that victim was not in not one family photograph. She said, at the time, I didn't know this was going to be a significant piece of evidence. She said, that's the one thing I remember. If I get any one of these jobs again, photographs and things like that, all these defences that get put forward, little things like that, is it consistent? Is their account that they're treated like a member of the family? Is it consistent? Do they get treated? Do they get a room the same as the rest of the family? All of that, their conditions and their little things. Are they in all those family photographs? Like you might see a genuine au pair who's in a family who's working there. You might see them in pictures, or actually, are they that invisible person that, yeah, if you didn't see them, you wouldn't know they existed within that household? And like I say, organ harvesting, it's thankfully it is rare in the UK, but we are starting to see cases of it coming through, unfortunately. And criminal exploitation, although it mentions there, you know, forced begging, shoplifting, forced marriage, obviously the big crime type within criminal exploitation is what most people know as county lines. So that's the involvement of minors generally, but not just minors, in the drug trade. And again, there's all sorts of ways offenders will suck people in. So again, there was a Devon and Cornwall case where some of the victims who were minors were adamant that they weren't victims at all, and that they got involved in drug dealing, but they weren't victims. And the way the offenders had done it is they set them up to be, so they were sent out with drugs to deal, and they had what they call a fake taxing. So that's just the slang term for They had their drugs stolen off them by another drug dealer. This was actually set up by the people who were exploiting them, because once they'd lost their drugs, then they were in debt, and then they had to work off the debt, and then they were effectively working for free for the drug dealers. So this was all deliberate, all set up. They had their drugs stolen off them, really, to have a means of control. You as individuals, you as children, now you've got a debt and you've got to pay it off. And they all believed that was real. And when they found out it wasn't, that was one of the, again, the investigators said that was the turning point in actually getting these children to realize how they'd been exploited. Sorry, did my microphone go on mute there for some reason?
No, we could still hear you, Dan.
Oh, not sure what happened. It popped up and said it was on mute. So yeah, that was a real key piece of evidence they were able to use with these children to actually convince them that they had been exploited. So actually, in terms of Devon and Cornwall, then, well, firstly, England and Wales, I looked up some of the stats recently. So 23-24, there were over 8,000 modern slavery crimes recorded nationally, or England and Wales, that is. And in Devon and Cornwall, we had 54 recorded in that same year. What the arrows are here is an assessment by our intelligence department of what types of exploitation are causing the most threat, risk and harm in the various, what we call our BCU. So Cornwall Isles of Scilly, New Devon is North, East and West Devon, Plymouth, and South Devon is obviously Torbay. So, and you can see much of it. Now, I was a little bit surprised that county lines doesn't form part of that. And there has been a huge amount of work. I don't want to be complacent as a force, but a huge amount of work done in relation to county lines, which I would argue is we've not eradicated the problem, but I think we are much better at recognizing it early and coping with it, and diverting children away predominantly from being exploited. But our big problem at the moment, as you can see, is sexual exploitation. That's the area that is causing us the most worry and the most threat, risk and harm. So there will always be something at the top of the pile, but yeah, that's just an indication of what we're looking at in the various parts of Devon and Cornwall at the moment. So these are some of the indicators. If you sat there and thinking, okay, that's great, thanks very much, Dan, I've got a bit of an understanding now about modern slavery. Human trafficking, apology, I should have gone to that. Human trafficking is just the movement of people in order to exploit them. So it's like a precursor type offence to somebody actually being exploited. So that's the human trafficking element to it. But you might be thinking, well, how do I, what do I actually look for to actually recognise whether somebody is a victim of slavery or trafficking? So these are indicators. Now, on their own, as I said before, they might not be conclusive that somebody has been a victim of slavery and trafficking. So just because somebody is an illegal entrant doesn't mean they're automatically a victim of human trafficking. Just because somebody has money deducted from their salary for food or accommodation doesn't mean they are definitely a victim of trafficking or poor language skills. But these are the sorts of things I would be looking at to say, does a case warrant more investigation? Is there a little bit of a red flag here where, so for yourselves as professionals, I should be reporting something? Is there an indicator here that maybe needs to be looked into more? So yeah, things like, particularly for people from the non-UK individuals, if they've had somebody else is holding their passport or their ID or their bank card, for example, or somebody's controlling how they get paid or where their money goes, that might not be modern slavery, but it would certainly be something I'd be saying, yeah, we need to do a little bit more investigation there just to have a look. So with things like labour exploitation, what we've seen is people working in factories. They're all registered for tax. They all seem above board. They've got a bank account. Their wages get paid into the bank account. What is sat behind that, though, is somebody who's organised them coming to the UK, who's organising their accommodation, and who physically holds their bank card. So when they get paid, that person goes to the bank, puts the bank card in because they're the one that helped them open the bank account, and they take the money out. And they will give them some of or none of that money. So on the surface of it, to the employer, this person looks completely legitimate. They've got their own bank account, tax code, everything like that. What's sat behind it, though, is complete control. And again, there was a big case in the West Midlands where that was completely the case, and an organised crime group even had somebody working in a recruitment agency who was deliberately putting people into legitimate employment, but they were sat behind it, controlling the part of the gang. They were controlling all the money, taking all the money away, and leaving these individuals exploited with nothing, with no money. And then there were all the threats and things like that about if they didn't work, what would happen to them. So if you do spot it, what can you do? What should you do? Obviously, the Devon and Cornwall Police through 101, through the website, through any of the partnership links that you've got can be reported. If you get individuals, if you're getting this information third hand from people or second hand from somebody else, that something they know about, they don't want to talk to the police, Crime Stoppers, stuff can go in, they will put stuff through. All I would say, I know sometimes getting through to Devon and Cornwall Police can be difficult and can involve a wait, and sometimes people might think, oh, I'll just do it through Crime Stoppers instead. The problem, the only issue with doing it through Crime Stoppers, and they are a brilliant organisation, is it's all anonymised. And what I don't want people to do who would be prepared to speak to the police further and give their personal details so that we can contact and we can speak to them, if they go through Crime Stoppers, all we get is an anonymised report and we're not able to go back to people. So yeah, just if you're thinking it's a quicker alternative to going direct to the police, please just bear that in mind. And then there's the Modern Slavery Helpline. That's there for you as professionals, as well as for victims or potential victims. If you get people that won't talk to the police, are very reticent about talking to you, and you know, because you're seen as part of the authority, part of the establishment, I'd encourage people to use that Modern Slavery Helpline as well. And again, they will pass information through. They will talk to individuals. They're a separate charity, and they will at times work with individuals to help them get out of their situation and get them to a point where they are able to talk to the police or willing to talk to the police. So they're your kind of your three main routes. So that was the main bit around the kind of modern slavery and what it is, and my kind of try and take on to break it down into layman's terms. Before I move on to the case study, is there any questions about that bit from anyone? Just give people a second. No, that's fine. If there isn't anything. Oh, sorry,
Dan,
apologies. I can't
right.
see
it's
everyone.
Rachel.
Yeah.
It's Rachel. It's not a question. I just wanted to add a comment on to your last slide.
Yeah.
As partnerships inspector. There is also a portal now where professionals can submit community intelligence, and I'd urge you all to have a look at that and perhaps put any information on that if you haven't used it already. I've shared a link to that with Rebecca, and that's going to be circulated after this meeting. So it's just a bit quicker than going through 101 for you.
Yeah, I was trying a nice way of saying I know that 101 can be incredibly frustrating and slow. So yeah, any other route, use that.
Could I very quickly be cheeky and take over the sharing for a few seconds?
Yeah, Yeah, of
And
course.
then, so if I just share my screen for everybody, this hopefully people can see that this is the front page for Devon and Cornwall Police's website. If any of you want to find that partner information sharing form, I'll just show you. If you scroll down to the bottom here, there's a section for partners. And if you go on to partner services, there is the Sharer Community Partnership Intelligence. It's a really easy form. I fill it in quite regularly, and it's really intuitive, takes you through and just asks you the information you know, and then that's triaged by Devon and Cornwall Police. So we push that out to partners all the time. So just thought I would share that for you. Stop sharing. Back over to you, Dan.
Thank you. No problem. Right, so this is Operation Flywheel. This is not it wasn't my investigation. It was my colleague Steve Moorcroft, who's down in Cornwall. His team took this on. So this was an investigation that involved sexual exploitation, and there's some interesting bits to it. Yes, slides. So everything I've gone through today, we'll share a copy of, and I think Rebecca's going to share it out afterwards. So yeah, you don't have to take notes as you're going along. So Operation Flywheel. So there were two locations, one in Plymouth and one in Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, where effectively we had brothels that were identified and being run. So this is the first one that was identified in Truro. Again, it was a flat above a shop. So it's nothing to do with the shops down below, just a little flat up above. So we had some intelligence that a brothel was being run out of a location. So when officers attended, they found it had 2 bedrooms in the property. And what was quite clear from the setup is one was what I describe as a workroom, and one was a room where one of our victims was living. So this was the setup for what I describe as the workroom. So this is where they would take clients, punters, as we call them. As you can see, obviously all the windows were blacked out and covered up. So again, this is the sort of thing we use these slides with officers to say, when you go into addresses, open your eyes to what you are seeing. Is it normal? So things like having the windows blacked out, if this was somebody's normal bedroom, why would you black the windows out? Is that normal behavior? Condoms, wet wipes, baby oils, things like that, excessive amounts of those in a room. Whilst if you've never been into a brothel before, you might sort of think, oh, it's just rubbish. What is it? You might not realize what you're looking at, but this is all evidence that this location is being used for sex work. And that's one of the key things we've got to prove. So again, as professionals, if you're going out, you're doing visits to people and you're seeing things like this, unfortunately now, after this presentation, you probably won't be able to unsee. None of the slides are that bad, but you won't be able to unknow some of these things. But this is the sort of thing you should be thinking, right, is this indication of something of sex work going on at an address? And again, this was then the second bedroom, which, as you can see, slightly worryingly, bars on the window, locks, but is much more what we suspected was the living accommodation. But again, when you're thinking about this is somebody's entire life belongings there in that cupboard. One bag, few sheets, few spare sheets, and things like that. This is all their worldly goods. If they're living in that room, where are all their belongings? And the reality is that was all they had. So they didn't have very much at all. So we had our first victim, who was a 36-year-old Chinese national. She got a visa to remain in the UK. She had on her £1,500 in cash. She overstayed her visa. She initially was telling us she was not a victim of modern slavery. So she was actually arrested as an overstayer. And then later on, she did claim to be a victim of human trafficking. She was referred into the NRM. She was released on bail, but unfortunately, as what often happens is once people are released, then they disappear. And that's unfortunately what happened to this woman. So to this day, we've not tracked her down. So we don't know what happened to her. She disappeared into the system, or disappeared once she'd been released. Now, I know a lot of people say, oh, that's awful, that's terrible. And it is. But we've got to take a line with victims. We treat people as victims. We can't lock people up just because we think they're going to disappear and it's somehow for their own good. If somebody is a victim of crime, we will treat them as such, on the understanding that yes, a lot of people will then disappear and they may go back into being re-exploited by other people. But you know, I do speak to a lot of officers who say, well, maybe we should arrest them, maybe we should try and prosecute them for some other offences to try and keep them safe. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work. And ultimately, you have to treat them like a victim. And there are times when we'll see people more than once. So they'll come to police attention more than once. And it may be the third, fourth, fifth time of that police contact where they will actually start to trust police. Because a lot of people, particularly, not necessarily, but yeah, a lot from overseas will have complete distrust of law enforcement. So whilst we're here trying to do our best for people, they just will not believe that we're actually here to look after them and to help them, because they have been conditioned by some of what they've seen from law enforcement in their own country, but also by the offenders who will be telling them, no, if you have any contact with the police, all that'll happen is you'll be kicked out of the country. You'll be prosecuted for immigration offences. You're the one that will get in trouble. And breaking down that kind of psychological control is really difficult. And that's why I'd encourage certainly all the police officers that I deal with is to have that consistent approach. Treat them like a victim, not like an offender. It might not work the first time or the second or the third time, but the fourth, fifth or sixth, actually they'll start to get that. No, they're not going to, you know, police are people we can trust. Within that address, so we had one person who was a victim and one person who we suspected was an offender. So it was a 44-year-old. I think it was a male in this case. No, a lady, sorry, who we actually believed was controlling the victim. So what you have at a lot of these places is one person who runs the address and will remain there. And then you'll have victims who will be moved through, might spend 2 or 3 weeks at one location and then moved around the country to various different locations. And they're just kind of shifted around from place to place. Now, the reality is, particularly with a lot of the women, the slightly older women who may have moved on to what you'd call like the madam who's running the place, they were probably victims as well. They've probably been exploited as sex workers over the years, and as they've kind of moved on, they're now in sort of trusted positions. And those sorts of people I have a lot of sympathy for, because I'm sure their background, they've had a horrendous background, and like I say, they have been victims. But ultimately, we've got to look at within policing at, are they going to be exploiting other people? Do they present a risk to other people? And if the answer is yes, then we have to deal with them as offender to safeguard all those other people that they might be part of the chain of exploiting. And certainly when we investigate, we will look at the hierarchy within an organised crime group. So we're not blind that somebody like our suspect here, they will be at the very lowest levels of the organised crime group. And consequently, if people like that are prosecuted, then, you know, the sentencing has a degree of flexibility to accept their level within the organised crime group. But key thing to me is if they are involved in exploiting any other people, really we have to be looking at protecting those other people, no matter how sorry or how much sympathy we have for them and their background and how they've ended up in this circumstance. So anyway, so this was this lady. So yeah, this was what was found on her at the time. And like I say, she denied any involvement. She was arrested. She was an overseer. And then later on, she did claim asylum. Sorry, I saw a hand go up there. Was there a question?
No, sorry, I pressed the wrong button.
Oh, sorry. Don't worry, I do that all the time. So then this was the second address. So this was one in Plymouth. Again, not the best address. Obviously, if you're going to be running a brothel and you're looking to make money, you want to have your minimum outgoings. So you want to be spending as little as possible on rent. So you're not going to be renting the best properties. Now I'll come on to these. I'll mention here pictures of condoms as well here. So this brand EXS that was identified in this property as well. That will become a key part of our investigation. But I'll explain that in a second. So again, second victim here, the lady was about 30 years old, again, denied any involvement in sex work or prostitution. Again, at the time, decision was made to arrest her as an overstayer by immigration enforcement. And she later claimed asylum. And when she was released, she also absconded. And the last intelligence we had that she was working in sex work again in the Southampton area. So again, this sort of shows the level of control over some of the victims. And again, there was a suspect at that address. I think this one was a male. Ironically, he claimed asylum in the UK, but then fled back to China himself. So again, he was suspected of being part of the organised crime group and involved in the control. So in this case, by the time my colleague Steve picked this job up, you had these two locations. You had two people who'd been arrested at each location. You had two potential victims. By the time Steve got it, two suspects had been released on bail and disappeared, and the two victims had been put into the NRM and dealt with, and they both disappeared. So he was left with not a lot to go on. But one of the things that they did find at the address in Plymouth was an agreement, a tenancy agreement, to show who had actually rented the address. So this is the benefit of having a financial investigator look at this. And I'm a financial investigator as well. We tend to look at things a little bit differently. We'll go straight back to, right, okay, this is about making, slavery and human trafficking is about making money. So where's the money going? Where can we pick up that trail? Who's paying? So who's renting the obvious things? Who's renting the address? Now on this one, our offender, Mr. Sean Wong, was a little bit sloppy because he put his own name on the tenancy agreement, which did help us a little bit. Quite often there will be a whole web of people who's renting it, things like that. But the great thing about, nowadays, very little is done in cash. So the days of just paying for renting a property and just dropping off cash in an envelope and the landlord or the agency that are letting it having no idea who's in there or who's paying for it are thankfully long gone. So most landlords now will insist on payment via a bank transfer. For us, that's brilliant. So we've got a bank account that's paying to rent this address. So that's what they had here. So they found the tenancy agreement, got Mr. Wong's details, and this is who Mr. Wong is. He was a Malaysian national who lived down in Redruth. He was a restaurant manager for a takeaway restaurant, and he had indefinite leave to remain in the UK. So at that point, we had a start point for, right, who could be behind this? Why is Mr. Wong renting a flat in Plymouth that we believe is being used for sex work? So as financial investigators, the first thing we did is have a good old dig into his bank account. So we got our production orders from the court and got access to his bank accounts. And what we found is alongside renting the addresses, he'd also been buying furniture. And because he's looking to make as much money as possible, he was looking to spend as little as possible furnishing these flats, hence going to the British Heart Foundation and buying everything as cheaply as he could from them. So we could see when he rented the flat, he had payments to the British Heart Foundation. When we went to them and said, okay, these payments on these dates, what were they for? They provided us with exactly what he bought and where it had been delivered to. So hence, this is where we found the link between the two addresses but the beds and furnishings have been sent to the address in Truro. So that's where we started to find out, right, there's a link between the address in Plymouth and the address in Truro as well. Sex work. Most sex work nowadays is advertised online, and it's perfectly legal. So any sex worker can go online, advertise their services, and as long as they're not offering sex work on the street, it's not actually illegal at all. And there are a number of websites which specialize in this. Viva Street actually is all for classified ads. 90% of Viva Street is nothing to do with sex work. It's a bit like Gumtree. But yeah, there is an element, there is a section on Viva Street which is for sex work. And if you want to advertise on that for sex work, then you have to pay. It's a paid for advertising service. So again, Mr. Wong's bank account, suddenly we see lots of payments to Viva Street, monthly or regular payments. And this is him paying to post adverts. And on there, that's just a description of what the advert might look like. Again, Viva Street will work with police. So when we have a suspicion, they have lots of what I'd call non-exploited sex workers who are advertising on there. They don't want any human trafficking or modern slavery associated with their website. So if we have details of somebody we think is posting adverts, we can go to them and they will supply us with the information on who posted the advert. And then in today's world, you get a huge amount of data in terms of who's paid for it, what bank account did they use to pay for it, what is their IP address that they've sent the advert from, what's their email that they've provided, what are all their customer details, all sorts of information. When they've logged on to their website, what phone numbers they've got associated with it. So we can get a massive amount of information from them, which is really useful. And the condoms. One of the things that's, one of the things they found, so they, again, the financial investigator shows their mind works in a slightly different way. They Googled EXS because it's not your kind of normal Durex kind of type brand. So they Googled it and they found you could buy them through a wholesaler. And again, on the bank accounts, there was payments to saveembarrassment.com where you can buy wholesale lots of condoms. And again, got hold of Save Embarrassment, said, all right, Mr. Wong, he's paid you these amounts of money on these dates. What was it for? And they came back and told us it was for boxes of condoms, large numbers of condoms. Obviously, all this sort of fills in the background that, yes, the sex work been running, because I don't think he was using them all himself by the numbers. Now, this was the bit that actually showed what is always really difficult for police to show is how much money does a brothel make. So when it comes to prosecuting somebody, we want to be able to tell the court not only the effect on individuals and how people have been controlled, but financially we want to say how much money has a brothel been making. Well, unless we've sat outside and watched people going in and out and counted the number of people, it's really difficult to tell. But what our financial investigators worked out is, well, most clients will use one condom per visit. And they knew how much from intelligence, roughly what the costs were per hour or per half hour visit. So they said, well, if we know the date the condoms were delivered, we know the number. They sat in the office and counted how many unopened ones were left, subtracted one from another, took the number of missing condoms, which they calculated to be 576, and multiplied that by the hour or half hourly rate. And that gives a rough estimate that those two brothels in 3 months made about £40,000. Now, given the costs of running the brothel, the rent would have been fairly cheap. What the individual women and the workers there were being paid wouldn't have been a huge amount. This is quite a profitable business, and that's for 2 brothels or 2 locations. If you imagine if you're an organised crime group and you are running these in multiple cities all over time, you can easily see how the amounts of money these groups are making. And I can tell you the amount of money that the individual women who are actually doing the sex work are being paid. If it's £140 an hour, they'll be lucky to get £40 an hour. They're getting a fraction, and that £40 an hour would be well paid. Some of them will be getting significantly less than that. And then off their hourly rate, or what they get paid per client, then it gets removed from that. Right, now you've got to pay for your food and accommodation as well. So quite a lot of them are making very little money out of this. So you can see how much the offenders are making. So yeah, so that was one memorable bit where they were all sat on the floor counting condoms to try and work out how much money this brothel was making. So this is what Mr. Wong was charged with in the end. So 2 counts of managing a brothel. It's under the Sexual Offences Act. Because of some of the phone work and the messages that were involved, he was also convicted for human trafficking. This is the arrange or facilitate travel of another person with a view to exploitation. Section 2 of the Modern Slavery Act, that's what most people know is human trafficking. And there were 2 counts of that in relation to the 2 women. So again, some of the phone work that was done, we could see he was involved in actually getting these women into the UK and getting them here and actually moving them around the country as well. And ultimately, it ended up in him getting a 7-year jail sentence and being deported back to Malaysia following on having served his sentence. So that was back in 2019. I think he has been deported now. I think he's gone out of the UK, I think. If not, he will be very soon. So yeah, so that was that case. Now that you might sort of think, oh yeah, that's a one-off. That doesn't sort of happen very often. Unfortunately, that happens quite regularly. So there are, like I say, sexual exploitation is quite high up on our list of risks. And there are current cases involving sexual exploitation, or certainly cases where there are risks of sexual exploitation, which are ongoing at the moment. So it's not something that I think is going to go away anytime soon. So hopefully that has been interesting. But like I say, if there's any questions, or if it's a nice sunny afternoon and everybody just wants to get going, I don't blame you. That's all. That's